Hey everybody, thank you so much for joining us here online. I am Pastor Josh Pontious coming to you from Community of Grace Lutheran Church in Peoria, Arizona. It is great to have you here. We are kicking off a brief but incredible series called Go for the Good. And we are starting today with a world of good. What does it mean that God's world and God's creation is good? And what does that mean for us? So I'm really excited to get it started with you today. Now, that being said, there's some not so exciting things that we start off with. It is so easy to wake up in the morning and grab your phone and start scrolling, or turn on the TV, put on the local news, or maybe you even grab a newspaper off the driveway. Does that even happen anymore? But you could get into that routine and suddenly you're inundated, you're covered with all of this negativity. There is so much bad stuff out there. It's quick and easy to let it overwhelm you. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't happen to me. There's just so much messiness and ugliness out there that it's easy to get wrapped up and consumed by it to the point where it's all we can think about. Just all of that bad stuff that is going on in the world and in our lives, and it's hard to not let it take hold of us. Now, with that being said, there are a number of mornings in my week that I get up and, I might do a little scrolling, but then I get the kids ready for school and we pile into the car and we start our drive to take people to school and all that, and I just take a look around and I see the beautiful colors of the sunrise, and I see the hot air balloons taking flight not far from my house. I see the plants and the incredible colors and diversity of nature, and I find myself saying to myself and often to my wife, Rebecca, man, we are so lucky that we found such an incredible and beautiful place to live. And this isn't the only place where I've seen that kind of thing. I have been blessed to live in the beauty of God's creation. I have lived just minutes away from the coast in both Florida and California, including in the redwood trees of Northern California. And I've had the chance to experience that. And I've been able to feel the cool mists coming off the North Sea in Holland. And I've dipped my toes in the Mediterranean off the coast of Spain. I've had the opportunity and the privilege to hike the Sierra Nevada mountains and also to kayak among the alligators in Florida's Everglades. And that's not that I've seen everything in this world, and that's not even everything that I've seen, but realistically, we don't want to be here all day. But it is incredible for me to recognize and to notice that God has created this incredible world, that God is this incredible artist and has made all of these things that are so incredibly good. And see, we're gearing up for our for the Good campaign around here, and we're excited to talk about all that it means and that all it's going to do for our church and for our campus. And if you're on our mailing list, you're going to get one of those commitment cards as you think through and pray through exactly how you want to support this exciting new endeavor that we're on in this coming week. But one of the main reasons that we're doing this, one of the main reasons this is to care for God's creation, is to recognize that this world that God has made for us is good and that we're called to take care of it. And why? Why is it? Now, I could give you all sorts of examples as to why. Like, I could cite news stories about caring for the environment or articles or YouTube videos, but realistically, you could look up all of that kind of stuff yourself. I'm here to talk about why we think that God has called us to care for the earth, why God has done this. You know, the Bible stuff, the stuff that pastors are supposed to talk about. But at the end of the day, this world that God has made us is good, and we're supposed to take care of it. Now, I know all of you got your newsletter this week, and as you got that, you got the link to read the entire text of Genesis 1 this week, so you know everything that I'm going to be talking about. But in case you didn't get a chance to click that link, and in case you haven't heard the story in a while, here's like the briefest overview of the beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. God begins to create the earth and the heavens out of this formless void. and then there's stars in the sky, and there's the sun, and then there's the moon, and then there's creatures, there's fishes, there's birds, there's plants, animals. And yeah, God does eventually get to us, the people. Now, those troublemakers are mostly going to be the focus of next week's message. But God does give a specific set of instructions to us and what our role is in this environment, in this creation that God has made for us. And so we're going to start with Genesis 1:28. And this is God talking to those new people. It says, God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. So that's the instruction. That is what God has told us to do with God's creation, and it's pretty exciting. Now, what's interesting is just a few verses down, then God tells us why God has told us to do what he's doing. It says, God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. Did you catch that? Did you catch why it is? It's pretty easy to miss because it's so simple. God just tells us that this earth, this creation, this thing that God has done is very, very good. And so as part of that, God has given us instructions to treat it and deal with it as though it's very, very good. That's the why. So what do we do with that? What is it we're supposed to accomplish? What does it mean to do these things? Well, first, subdue the earth. We think of that word subdue, and we think of subjugation and making it bend to our will. And there is some aspect to that. We can't pretend that it's not there. But I would say that we are to make sure that the earth is working for us, but do it in the context, in the reality, understanding that this thing that God has made for us is good. And therefore, we are supposed to treat it and use it as God has created it, as God has intended it to be. So we are to care and subdue for the earth for the purposes that God intends for it, not just what we want to be doing. And then what does it mean to have dominion over the creatures? What does it mean for us to, in other words, to dominate them? How does that even work? Well, again, it's recognizing that God has made those creatures. God has made those creatures for a purpose. We are to treat God's creatures and God's creation with respect and dignity, recognizing their worth and their value, not just for us, but also for God. All of this is recognizing and using the gifts of creation that God has given us to care for, not for us to own. This God that has created this world in this unique way. In the Hebrew Old Testament, we even recognize that when you dig deep into the word study, that this word that God uses to create all of these incredible things is a word that isn't applied to anything else. Only God can do this kind of creating. This is a special thing that God has done. But God has given it to us to steward, to use, and to utilize in ways that respects the way that God has made them and that God intends for us to do. Now, the truth is we can't do that perfectly. There's really no way to get any of God's instructions perfectly. Because the truth is, this is God instructing us to do something. It's an imperative. He's called us and made us to do this thing, but we're never going to get it right. We're never going to get it perfectly right. In fact, anytime God gives us an instruction, we know that we can't get it right. And you might get really tired of me saying that all the time, but it's true. We can try our best, but we are always going to fall short. And we have fallen short, and we will fall short on our care for God's creation, for God's earth, for the things that God has put in our charge. But the good news is that it doesn't 100% depend on us, that God is this creative force, and God is always doing something new. And at the end of all things, that God is going to put things right. So we take a look now at the book of Revelation of all places, and we're going to look there in the 21st chapter. And it says this, it says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away. And the one who was seated on the throne said, 'See, I am making all things new.' Also, he said, 'Write this, for these words are trustworthy and true.'" Now, this is one of those incredible moments, and this is going to be something that you will only find here at Community of Grace. It is a pastor who is willing to go all the way from Genesis to Revelation in a 15-ish minute sermon. It is only here that you will find somebody ambitious enough to do that. But it is true that God is going to make all things new, and God is going to do this incredible new thing. God is always in this creative mode. And yet, unfortunately, it is this knowledge that has caused some people of faith to say, listen, it doesn't really matter if we care for God's creation. We can't do anything that awful anyway, because God's got this, and God's going to make it all right in the end. So it doesn't really matter what we do here, does it? Yikes. That's not what we are called to do. God is in the business of restoration. God is in the business of this new creation. God is all about making things new, making things right, and fixing the mistakes that we're going to make along the way. And yet, the point of our faith is not to just wait for that new creation, those new bodies that God has promised for us, that new heaven and the new earth, either when we die and we meet our end or when God comes back and makes all things new. It's to live kingdom life right here, right now. And that includes God's instructions to us, God's promises for us. So God doesn't say, hey, just sit around and wait for these next things. God says to go, be fruitful, multiply, care for creation. Yes, have dominion over it. Yes, treat it in these ways that are beneficial to you, but do it in these ways that recognize that I, God, am in control, that I, God, have made these things for you, and that I, God, love all of these things just like I love you. That those promises aren't just for the future, and that those living into that future kingdom lifestyle means living into it here and now. And those are some really, really good instructions. But also, it is really, really good news.